Hi everybody and welcome to a new episode of Analytics Insider. Today we will talk about the XMLA endpoint in Microsoft Fabric, and I was inspired to do this video because I read a blog post. You can see this post here. It's from Kai Unkrot and it's announcing XMLA write support for direct lake datasets. So from now on, you can also write via XMLA into direct lake datasets. And we will take a look on what is direct lake, what is XMLA, and afterwards we will have a hands-on session. I already created a lakehouse, and then we will go on and create a lake dataset, and then we will do read operations to the XMLA endpoint and also write operations by creating a new measure on the dataset. So let's get started. So first of all, what is direct lake? In Microsoft Fabric, we have a third option for datasets. So in Power BI, we know that we have direct query where the data is always stored in the source. So we can have a big amount of data, and the queries will be slow because we don't have much usage of the Vertipack engine and in-memory reads and calculations. Then we have the import mode where we read the data from the source, for example from the lakehouse or the warehouse, and we write the data afterwards in memory by compressing the data with a Vertipack's engine. And this is fast, but we have to duplicate the data, and this can always take some time. In some projects, this can take more than 1 hour for processing all the data. And the new feature in Fabric, which sounds really cool to me, is the direct lake feature, which we can see here. And this is a mixture of both of them. So on the one hand, we don't have to duplicate and process the data, but we read the data from source with a high performance because we directly read from the Parquet file into the Power BI report. And yes, so the second question is, what is XMLA? And XMLA stands for XML for analysis. And this is quite an old technology. I think it has been founded in the 2000s, and it allows client tools to communicate with datasets in Microsoft Fabric. The operations can be either read or write operations. And in Fabric, the default is to allow read operations, but to not allow write operations. But I will also show you how you can enable write operations in the Fabric admin portal. And the purpose is that you can use client tools such as SSMS, DAX Studio, Visual Studio, and PowerShell cmdlets, or also Tabular Editor v2. And on the right hand side, you can see a small example. So for example, we have Tabular Editor, and we can read and write directly into a Fabric dataset, or the same with SQL Server Management Studio. And now we will do the hands-on session. There we will first of all take a look on our lakehouse, and afterwards we will create a dataset in our lakehouse because you have a default dataset in the lakehouse, but this is not available for the XMLA endpoint, so you always have to create a new dataset. And then we will first of all open the dataset in SSMS to just take a look on the table, and afterwards we will create a new measure with Tabular Editor version 2. So let's switch to the browser. And here you can see I already prepared a workspace where we have a lakehouse, which is named LH Direct Lake Demo. And there is some sample data of the New York taxi dataset inside. And now we can create a new dataset by opening the SQL endpoint. And then it takes some seconds. Then we can click on reporting, and then we can create a new Power BI dataset. Now we can choose the tables. So we have just one table in this dataset, so it's not a star schema, it's just one table. And we choose this one. And now the dataset should directly open and we can rename it. So we will rename it to DS for dataset. Oh, there's a pop-up been blocked. So we do that again. So DS for dataset, and then we can name it DS underscore taxi, for example. So now the dataset has been generated and it's loading a little bit, but we are done. So we have just one table in our dataset, which is fine for demo purpose. Here you can see the table, and here we can see the name, so we should change it to DS underscore taxi. And now we can go back to our workspace. And now we see this new dataset DS underscore taxi. And as I mentioned before, in order to allow write operations with the XMLA endpoint, we need to activate it in the admin settings. So we can click on settings and go to the admin portal. And there we have the capacity settings for our trial license. So I don't know if you have a trial license or another license, but you have to open the license you want to use and you have to click on the capacity, and then you have the Power BI workloads. And there you have to activate the read and write for XMLA endpoint. The default setting here is read only. Okay, so now we have activated the XMLA endpoint. And now we can try to open it in SQL Server Management Studio. Therefore, we have to copy the connection string of it. And this you can find when you go back to the workspace and you open the dataset again, or you click on the three dots here, more options, and then settings. And there you can see the server settings, where you can also find the connection string. And I just click on copy, go to SQL Server Management Studio, and then I click on connect and choose analysis services. And there you can enter the URL. You have to remove, when we go back to the browser, the data source equals, so you have to start directly from Power BI. And you also have to remove the name of the dataset, which is from here, this initial catalog DS taxi. You can remove this one, and then you can go to options, and here you can choose which database, which means which dataset you want to choose. So now it's gathering all the datasets from the server. The server equals the Power BI workspace or Fabric workspace. So now we browsed for it, and here we have the ds_taxi, which is our database or dataset. Now we can connect to it. And now the XMLA endpoint is used to gather the information of the dataset, and you can find the tables in here. And you can also do the right click and click on script database as create to, and into a new query window. And now we have the 13th of August. You can see the compatibility level is 1604, and this means that we use the Direct Lake feature because this is the latest Direct Lake compatibility level. Okay, so now we were able to access our Direct Lake dataset with SQL Server Management Studio. In the next step, we are going to create a new measure, and therefore we use Tabular Editor. And in Tabular Editor, we can also connect to a dataset from DB or database. And there we can also paste our connection string. So here we can paste the full connection string we just copied. And click on OK. We have to authenticate again. So I choose the DS taxi. And now we can click on tables, and here we have our table with all the columns. And now we can, for example, create a new measure which builds the sum for the column extra. So we can do a right click, create new measure, and we can give it a name, test measure taxi. I think that didn't work. So we can rename it here, test measure taxi. And then we can say it's the sum of table is NYC TLC, and the column is extra. Okay, so now we created the measure, and in order to bring the measure to the server, we now have to deploy the model. So we can click on model, deploy, and we want to deploy to the same server. We want to overwrite our database with this new version. And yes, we can choose any deployment options, and now we can deploy it. And this is now write operations and not a read operation. So if we go back to Microsoft Fabric and go back to the workspace, and when we open the dataset again, you can see now that we have our measure in here, test measure taxi. And this is quite cool because now we don't have only the Fabric UI to make changes on our dataset, but we can also use, for example, Tabular Editor 2, or we could use SQL Server Management Studio, we can use DAX Studio, and all other client tools. And we can also do automation tasks with, for example, PowerShell, cmdlets. Yes, so I hope you learned a little bit, and if you're happy, I would be happy if you give me a like for this video. Goodbye.